Good morning. I'm told I can speak too quickly when I get excited. And so as I'm already excited to be here today, I'll try and control myself. Now, normally I would hold these presentations in person and encourage people to ask questions as we progress. But given the virtual format, I think it's better to run through the whole presentation and then answer any questions at the end, either in the chat box or even later on via email or social media. I'm more than happy to respond. I hope you find this session useful, but I also realize that there are people here who have a good deal of experience of the scientific publishing process. I apologize to them in advance if I talk about things that they already know. Right, so I sincerely hope you find the presentation useful and it helps you when you sit down to write that Nobel Prize winning piece of research. I don't mind if it's not published by de Gruyter, just mention me in your acceptance speech. Now, I love my job. I could talk about it for days, but unfortunately we don't have that long. I've published academic and scientific journals and books for 30 years. 20 of those years were spent with Elsevier, and I've also worked with other publishing companies. I even ran my own for a while, but let's get rid of my ugly face so you can concentrate on the slides. Now, the main reason I joined de Gruyter was its rich history and its reputation for putting the authors and its customers first. It's also eager to embrace new technologies to provide better service for those authors, librarians, reviewers, and editors. I work with these excellent professionals to bring you hundreds of de Gruyter scientific journals, thousands of books and databases, in a variety of formats with numerous partners. It's also still a family business, and it puts a great deal of emphasis and importance on relationships. And here are some of the numbers I was talking about: 1,500 books a year, 330 subscription journals, and a further 100 open access journals. It's a global company as well. We have 7 locations, offices worldwide, but we have representatives all over the world. And we have nearly 2 million visitors every month onto our new website. Thought you'd like to see some figures relating to your university. So we can see here the continued growth of research output from Seoul National University since 2012. And the good thing is that the number of citations, number of times the papers have been cited globally, is also increasing at a steady and impressive rate. And this probably has to do with the fact that Seoul researchers, like other successful peers around the world, reach out to their colleagues. So there have been 662,000 collaborators in 193 countries since 2001. Oops, excuse me. Now, this next slide might seem a little bit silly, but it does have a serious point, so please be patient with me. So more than 2,220 years ago, the earliest woodblock printing process could be traced to China. If we fast forward to 1436, Johannes Gutenberg in Germany was recognized as the inventor of the printing press. De Gruyter itself was formed in 1749, and Gary Starkweather invented the laser printer in 1969. And finally, Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web, accredited in 1990. Now, the serious point here is that over the centuries, great minds from all over the world have taken the technology and the science behind the publishing industry, and they've collaborated to improve it. And this is what the research publishing process is all about. We stand on the shoulders of giants to move our fields forward, so that those that follow us can say they stood on our shoulders. And before I go on, I recognize that representatives from a number of different research disciplines may be attending today. And so it's impossible to tailor this presentation to everyone's precise needs. But hopefully the content I've prepared will make sense and be helpful for everyone in some way. Now, the research cycle itself is one I'm sure most people here are familiar with. Funding is dependent on publication, which drives more research, ultimately leading to new findings, which again need to be published. But the publishing landscape you may not be as familiar with. As you can see, de Gruyter's job is to make the process run smoothly, whether this is pre-publication by managing submissions and peer reviews, or producing and archiving the content while ensuring it reaches as wide an audience as possible. The figures involved in the whole research and science publishing industry each year are quite large. 30 million communications between editors, authors, and publishers. There's 1 billion downloads each year, and more than 40 million papers now available, dating back to the early 19th century. Approximately 5,000 editors are appointed each year, and 500 new journals are launched. And a key figure, more than 3 million submissions are made each year, with 50% being rejected. The growth of scholarly journals has been incredible, especially in the latter part of the last century. It seems strange that in 1789, one article suggested that there could be too many journals. Unbelievably, this figure is still growing by around 3% each year. But in many ways, the growth in the number of journals is driven by the amount of research and how science develops and evolves in different directions. In 2018, 2.6 million research articles were published in the 50,000 most important journals. That's one every 12 seconds, and each one takes an average of 40 minutes to read. So why is it important to write a good paper? Well, I think we've just seen that the competition out there is vast. And so before submitting your paper, make sure that it's an excellent reflection of your work, presented in the most professional way. If you frustrate or annoy editors and reviewers, you make it easier for them to reject. Give consideration to your research and ask yourself the following questions. Have you done something that's novel? Is it new and interesting, unique? Is the work directly related to a current hot topic? And have you checked the latest results in that field? Have you provided solutions to any difficult problems? And have any findings been verified? If necessary, have the appropriate controls been performed if required? And are your findings comprehensive, or is the narrative incomplete? If all the answers are yes, a good, strong manuscript is what is needed next. Now, editors often get frustrated. So try not to increase their levels of stress. Try to submit papers that are in scope. Every journal has its aims and scope, outlined on the journal homepage. The guide for authors changes with journal. So not just with publisher, but with journal. So check the guide for authors. The editors have written that guide for your assistance, and they expect your research paper to adhere to the guide. Have you made any inappropriate or in fact no suggested reviewers? There's no guarantees that your suggestions will be accepted by the editors, but they'll appreciate the fact that you're trying to help them find reviewers. Have you responded adequately to the reviewers' comments and recommendations? If they've taken the time to read the paper and give those comments, you do as well to listen to them and react accordingly. Don't resubmit a rejected manuscript without revision. It'll just be rejected again. And is the standard of English adequate? I feel guilty when I talk about English because I'm an Englishman. So like most of my compatriots, I'm very bad at other languages. And I'm thankful English is the main language of written science, even if it doesn't seem fair. However, given that's the case, it's very important to stress its correct use. Editors and reviewers reject on the basis of poor English. And remember that journal editors and reviewers come from every country on earth. English isn't necessarily their first language either, but they still insist that papers are written correctly. There's a quote here from an editor regarding language. I won't read the whole thing, but the last line, I don't want to waste my time or the time of my reviewers if there are more than 5 grammatical errors in the abstract. And that quote's from an editor whose first language isn't English. So your article needs to be of value for you, because it's the key to the door of your community, your research community, and obviously for the research community itself. A study is meaningful only if it is clearly understood, reproducible in some cases, and it's read and used. So the definition of a well-written academic paper, it helps the reader easily appreciate and understand the significance of your work. It has a clear, useful, and exciting message, and it's presented and constructed in a logical way. Preparation is key, and deciding what type of article you're going to write is important. Will it be a full article, an original research article? Will it be a review paper or a perspectives piece? Or will it be a shorter letters paper or a short communication? Let's look at some of these in a little more detail. So a full article is a way of disseminating completed research findings. On average, it's typically 8 to 10 pages. There'll be 5 figures and about 25 references. The idea is to draft and then submit the paper to an appropriate journal. And it really is an important part of the process when developing a research career. A review paper is a critical synthesis of your research topic. It's often many more than 10 pages, more than 5 figures, and has about 80 references. But more often than not, it'll be commissioned by the journal editors themselves. And this is an excellent way to consolidate your career. Short communications are published for quick and early dissemination of new advances. They're much, much shorter than full articles. But these are usually limited in length by the journal. And again, the guide for authors will give you details of what's required. There are also dedicated letters journals or short communication journals in some fields where authors can present their initial findings before going on to develop a full-length paper. Now, once you've decided on the type of article you wish to write, you have to consider selecting a journal. Oops. Let me just backtrack a bit and show you the impact that those three types of paper have in terms of citations. Again, these are averages, but you can see reviews are highly cited for a longer period of time because, as I said, they are a synthesis, critical synthesis of a given area, and so many people within the community will refer to them. Notes, because of the novelty of the research that's being rushed out there to the community, are quite highly cited early on, and regular articles are cited for a longer period of time, but at a lower level than initially, anyway, a lower level than short communications and reviews. So when you're selecting a journal, I think the best piece of advice I ever heard is not to submit to a journal that you don't read yourself. It's better to submit to a journal that you have a really good feel for. You should consider, again, I'll keep going back to it, but the aims and scope of the journal. Again, it's written by the editors with help from their editorial boards. So they're telling you exactly what they're looking for. So refer to the aims and scope of the journal. It's worth the investment of your time. You've got to consider the type of manuscript you've written and the specific subject area. Sometimes there's no point in submitting to a general journal on, say, chemistry, when there are if your paper is about chromatography, there are specific journals out there for chromatography. So maybe the specific nature of your work would be better suited to one of those journals. What's the significance of your work? You also want to consider the prestige, the quality, the respect of the editors in the field, but also the journal. What is the production speed like? You know, we all want to publish as quickly as possible within the constraints of the rigorous peer review process, but speed is increasingly important. What's the community and the audience associated with the journal? As I said before, if you read that journal, you have a feel for it. That is your journal's community, or one of your journal's community, one of your community's journals, I beg your pardon. And what's the coverage and the distribution? It's not necessarily the case that you need to publish in an international journal. There may be reasons for publishing regionally in a South Korean dedicated journal, for example. In which case, of course, the language question may not be a problem either. Oops, I'm so sorry. Right. So, as I said before, every journal has a guide for authors, and it will have been written by the editors. So you ignore it at your peril. And remember, the guide for authors can change. It evolves. So even if it's not the first time you're submitting to a journal, go back and look at it again. You need to apply it to your manuscript, even the first draft. You know, you don't want to write the paper and then have to go back to reconstruct it. Most articles should be constructed in this way. As I said before, this is a generic presentation, so I understand that there will be specific requirements for different subject areas, but it would be wise to take counsel from colleagues or study previously published papers in your field as well, because as I said, it is generic. When preparing the title, the abstract, and choosing the keywords, bear in mind that these are the areas that will be used for indexing and therefore search engines. For the main body of the article, the introduction, the methods, results, and discussion, make sure that you never use more words than are actually needed. Try to be concise but precise. And finally, ensure that you have a conclusion, acknowledgements, references, and include any supporting materials. So let's look at each section in turn. It might seem obvious, but use the title to tell your reader what the paper is all about. It's like a headline in a newspaper. It doesn't tell the full story, but it should be sufficient to attract the reader's attention and encourage them to read more. However, keep it concise, informative, and avoid any jargon or unknown abbreviations. Here are some real examples of titles before and after revision. Remember, the reader also has limited time available, and so avoid long, unnecessary titles. Be specific and ask yourself, how would I search for this information? So put yourself in the position of the reader. And finally, there's some actual criticism from an editor. If you look at the bottom right-hand side, the remarks there, the editor refers to English needs help. He says, I haven't read the paper, but suspect there's something special about these properties. So he recognizes it's important, but the title has thrown him. It doesn't need to be as long and convoluted as it is. It was revised, you see in green there, it's been revised there. So it's more specific. Now the abstract is like the advertisement for your journal. You want to make it interesting. Again, it needs to be easily understood without having to read the whole article. So you need to be accurate and specific, but a clear abstract will influence whether or not your work is considered, whether an editor should invest time in it and send it on for review. Again, try and be as brief and concise as possible. The keywords are your manuscript's labels. They are going to be used by the indexing and abstracting services. And so try to avoid the use of abbreviations unless they're generally accepted, like DNA, for example. Refer back again to the guide for authors for the journal you're submitting to, as it may have specific examples of acceptable and unacceptable abbreviations. Now, the introduction is your opportunity to convince the reader that you know why your work is useful, but don't confuse it with the results, the discussion, or conclusion. What's the problem you're addressing? What are its main limitations? Are there any existing solutions? And very importantly, what do you hope to achieve? When writing up your methods, you should include detailed information so that the reader is able to replicate any experiment you're describing. But don't forget to reference previously published procedures. You'd want those who read your work to do the same for you. Results, this is where you would present your primary or your essential or primary results, and maybe use graphs or tables and photographs. And the discussion section is where you can show how the results relate to your study's aims and hypotheses, how they relate to other studies. Describe interpretations of your findings, and even the limitations of the study. Don't make grand statements that aren't supported by the data or the text. And don't introduce new results or terms that will just confuse people. But finally, don't ignore work that's been published that disagrees with yours. This is your opportunity to prove your case. And so confront this work, reference it properly, and convince the reader that you're right. Now, the conclusion shouldn't merely repeat the abstract. The abstract is an overview of the paper. The conclusion should be used to highlight what you have shown, what it means for the field, and describe applications or even possible extensions of the work. Now, you should definitely acknowledge anyone who's assisted you with your work and your research, but do ask their permission to be acknowledged. These people may be other researchers who have offered hands-on assistance, someone who's provided help polishing the language, or someone who's offered critical comments. But whatever you do, don't forget anyone who's provided funding and include any grant or reference numbers. Now, more mistakes are usually made with the references than any other part of the manuscript. I've known editors who will reject otherwise good papers because they've become frustrated and had to work through and correct a full list of references. That's not their job. That's the job of the author. The idea is to make a friend of the editor, not a lifelong enemy. But remember to cite the main scientific publications on which your work is based. Don't use too many references. There's no point in just referencing for the sake of referencing. Avoid excessive and especially unnecessary self-citations, and try to avoid citations of publications from the same institute or the same region. I mean, sometimes you have to. I'm not saying don't self-cite and don't cite colleagues in your institute, but it's the key word here is excessive. And remember, about 25 to 30 references are appropriate for a full text article. So who's the first named author? Well, they will conduct and supervise the analysis and the proper presentation and the interpretation of the results. They will put the paper together, they'll write the paper, and they will submit the paper to a journal. The co-authors make intellectual contributions, and they will review each paper draft. They should also be able to present the paper and its results and defend any implications or discuss the limitations of the study. Try to avoid leaving out authors who should be included, because that will just create problems at a later stage. And don't include authors when they didn't contribute significantly. Someone who in your office who makes you coffee to keep you writing in the early hours of the morning isn't a co-author. So when submitting your paper, a good cover letter gets you through the editor's door. This is your main opportunity to address the editor directly. Believe me, if you assist and convince them at this stage, you'll certainly be looked on more favorably. Let the editor know that you have approval from all of your co-authors and explain the importance of the research. If you can provide 3 or 4 suggested reviewers, this may also help, but try to choose experts from outside your own institute or country. From conversations I've had recently, I can assure you that this is increasingly appreciated by the editors. It won't guarantee publication, but it will guarantee you receive more attention than others, maybe even for your next submission. Because like editors, like elephants, editors have very good memories. And finally, check and check again. Ask colleagues to read and ask them to be critical. It's better to get criticism from somebody you know. Have you applied the guide for authors requirements to your paper? And are you sure the paper is appropriate for the journal you're submitting to? Take another look at the aims and scope. Conduct a final check for language, either by a native English speaker or an editing service. You know, you're very fortunate in that these days, and for many years now, we've had the internet. It allows us to reach out across the world. There are bound to be colleagues working in the same community, same research community as you, in Canada, in Australia, in the UK, in America, and in other English-speaking countries. Reach out to them, work with them, ask them for their input. They could become a co-author, and you could build a relationship. Try to ensure that any literature that you're referencing is balanced as well, not just from one source. Are the aims, purpose, and the significance of the results clear? And finally, use a spell checker, but be aware they're not perfect. Ooh. Now, rejection. I'd just like to say a few words about rejection, something I've learned a little bit over the years. Don't take it personally. Don't despair. Every researcher has a paper rejected at some point. Read the reviewer's comments and be self-critical. And if you decide to resubmit the paper to another journal, make sure you read that journal's guide for authors and aims and scope before doing so, because they do differ. Not long ago, I was at a conference and I was talking to an editor. He was a Cambridge professor, and he pointed to somebody at the far side of the room and said, "David, he has just rejected one of my papers from his journal. He's another editor." And I said, how do you know? Because it's a blind review process. He said, well, I'm 86. He said, I've been around long enough to know how that man writes. And it was definitely him that rejected my paper. So I said, well, are you annoyed? Does that upset you? And he said, well, how can I be upset? I reject papers all the day. That would make me a hypocrite. It's part of the process. Sometimes you get rejected. So remember, and the other thing to remember is that reviewers give up their own time to look at papers. Their comments are intended to be constructive. While it might be tempting to shut the curtains if you've been rejected and turn out the lights and cry quietly to yourself, believe me, it's not the end of the world. Take a deep breath and then read the feedback and reread it. Ask a colleague to take a look at the feedback as well. Make a list of every comment made and then deal with each one of them methodically in turn. If you're resubmitting, you're writing back to the editor, be polite, be considered and professional in what you write. You might be rejected with a suggestion for minor or major revisions, and this is why I'm highlighting this continual correspondence and relationship with the editors and reviewers. So be thorough. Don't ignore any comments that you might disagree with. If you do disagree with them, you are entitled to disagree, but give your reasons for disagreeing. And as I say, be polite and professional in doing so. Ensure that the response is clear and well constructed, and again, concise. Take your time, provide extra information or data if possible. Address your editor to your letter to the editors and the reviewers, and make sure that any identification number associated with your paper is included in the correspondence. Now, if you've been rejected and you wish to resubmit to another journal, don't be afraid to mention the initial rejection in your covering letter to the new journal and the new editor. Also include the reviewer's comments, but make sure you explain to this editor why his or her journal is the better place for your research to be published. Remember, if you submit to another journal, there's a really good chance that it will end up on the desk of the original reviewer. Despite the fact that we saw the big numbers of thousands and thousands of reviewers and editors, research communities are quite small. So if you've ignored the original feedback, there's a chance that it will be rejected again. A few slides on ethics. It's really important to be aware of ethics in academic publishing. I mean, politicians have actually lost their jobs decades after they have been unethical in the scientific and academic community. So, submit your papers to journals in the correct way. It's an extremely important matter, and it can make or break a career. I must emphasize the annoyance or even outrage felt by editors and reviewers if someone is trying to cheat, because I'm afraid this is ultimately what being unethical is. It's cheating. And as I used to tell my children, cheats always get caught. It's important that everyone knows exactly what is right and what is wrong, because the editors do not accept excuses. They haven't got time to engage in a long debate about ethics. Unethical behavior can include the falsification of results, plagiarism, duplicate or multiple submissions, redundant publication, failure to acknowledge prior research and researchers, and inappropriate identification of all co-authors, and of course any conflict of interest. Let's just go through some of these things now so you're clear. Fabrication is when someone makes up data and results and records them as being true information. Falsification is the changing of information so that the research results are not accurately portrayed. Plagiarism is taking someone else's ideas, their processes, results, or words without giving credit to the original source. By taking the credit and rewards that are really due to others, it's nothing less than theft, and it eliminates the motivation of other scientists and other researchers to generate new ideas. Whatever you do, don't send your submission to another journal before you've received a decision on the initial submission. Competing journals do exchange information, and the editorial processes will be stopped immediately. The time wasted by editors and reviewers will not be appreciated and could damage a researcher's reputation. Now, submitting a paper that has already been published elsewhere is also not acceptable, unless it's in another language. And even then, reference should be made to the first published paper, and the editors should be made aware of the history of the paper. The process of salami slicing is also not allowed. This is where multiple papers are created using research that could be published in one review article. Oh, sorry, one article or review, I beg your pardon. And that is my short presentation. I hope it's of help. As you can see, I've used a younger picture of myself there because I'm getting old and bald. But my email is there. I would welcome linking in on social media. I'm more than happy to answer any specific questions now or at a later date. So please feel free to keep hold of those details. There may be something in 6 months' time that you wish to discuss. At least you'll have a contact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And we have already got the first comment that says you are not ugly. In the very first comment, so you can be rest assured. There were several questions, so I have them repost to everyone, so everyone can see the question. So let me scroll up. Okay, so I think the first question is, how long will it normally take from journal submission to publication, or in general, what is the review speed like?
Right, it is a difficult question to answer because different subject disciplines take different amounts of time. What we try to do is get a decision very quickly from the editors and reviewers. And when I say we, I mean all academic publishers. Finding reviewers is sometimes difficult because the editors try to find reviewers that have a level of expertise in the research that you're submitting. So that might mean that there are very few possible reviewers out there. So things like this can take time. However, we would try to, on submission, after submission, after acceptance of a paper, we will try to put an initial draft online within 10-12 days. That it will be given a DOI, which is a digital object identifier number. The paper will be revised, will be edited by you and the editors, and the final format might look different, but that DOI number will remain. So effectively, the work will go online as quickly as possible after acceptance, so that other people in your community can reference it, can read it, and can reference it if needs be. But as I said, the DOI number stays with the paper as it changes, as it's formatted by the typesetters, until we get to the final version of record. The review process, as I say, you can't be precise because it depends on the area. It depends on so many factors, and it depends on human beings as well. You know, a reviewer might be given a paper and then suddenly have an illness or a death in the family, and suddenly the editor is waiting on the review, and he has no one else to give the paper to. So it could drag on. But I mean, those are extreme cases, but human beings are involved, so it can take time. The whole peer review process, by the way, I think a lot of people think that this is an invention of the publishers. It's actually the peer review process was introduced by academia itself. To ensure the quality of published work. So really, I mean, it's an excellent system, but while it's important, we realize it's important for researchers to get their papers published as quickly as possible. You have to also accept that these people are doing it free of charge, and out of their obligation to their communities. So we have to cut them a little bit of slack. We have to be a little bit of understanding.
Okay. I hope that answers your questions. And then there's the second one. Does duplicating a study conducted in a country, in a new country, considered a novelty since it will allow discovering the situation in that country? Would it be interesting for the journal to publish?
Right, sorry, let me see.
See in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm just sorry, just scrolling down. Sorry. Does duplicating study conducted in a country, in a new country? Well, we work in a, I mean, it's the great thing about what you're doing, about working in research and working in research publishing. The great thing for me is the fact that we work in a global community. And so in a way, there are no national boundaries. You know, work will be published and it will appear online. And even if that work is published in a country, it's available online for the world to see. So you should never duplicate work, because your audience is a global audience, whether you're publishing in a country or not. You know, as I say, the beauty of academic publishing is that we can reach out to people, we can work with people in different countries, of different cultures, and there are restrictions for researchers in some countries, generally because of the economics of the country, the available finance. You know, researchers in South Korea and in Europe are fortunate. You know, we live in societies that are fairly affluent societies, but there are researchers that may work in developing countries where the finance isn't there for them to conduct the experiments that their colleagues can. That doesn't mean that they are less superior intellectually. I mean, they may have the gifts required to win a Nobel Prize, but they're restricted by what they can do in a laboratory, say. But it's a global community we're part of. So you'll be caught out if you duplicate something in a country that's been published elsewhere. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, David, can you see the next one after that? About the cover letter.
Just scrolling down.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, the cover letter. I'm not suggesting you write a letter that's 4 pages long and very descriptive and beautifully written. I'm suggesting writing a short, concise cover letter, because the necessity for this is that it is your, I think I said in the presentation, it's your opportunity to write directly to the editor. It's your opportunity to make that connection with the editor, and it's your opportunity to try and assist as well, to try and show them that, you know, your co-authors are supportive of you, and to show that why you think your research is important. It doesn't need to, it just needs to be a short letter. So you don't need to. You're not writing a novel. It's a short communication. The editor hasn't got time to read long letters, but they'll appreciate you giving them a chance to. What you're doing is you're saying to the editor with the cover letter, "Hey, look, I've prepared this paper that you're about to read, and this is why you should read it. We've done some exciting work. We've done some novel work. My co-authors are in full agreement with me. And by the way, if you need some reviewers, could I politely suggest these people at other institutes, because they're working in the same field as I am." Nothing more than that, really, but it helps, and if the editor's excited by or interested in your cover letter, they'll go straight to your paper and have a look at your paper. You're promoting yourself in a way. You're promoting your work in a way. Is that okay?
Yeah. The next question is from Martina.
Martina, hi. Yeah. No. So you submit your thesis to your university library. If we rewrite our thesis as an article and submit for publishing somewhere else, would this be? Not necessarily, no. It's the thesis will be probably much longer than a research article would be. I think it's this is where a self-citation is acceptable. You should always reference the original work, but will the thesis become publicly available? Will it become widely available, or is it just being published within the firewalls, if you like, of the university? I think there are several things to consider: the length of the thesis, where the thesis is published, but ultimately, what I would say is that you should reference it, because it is a published piece of work.
I think we have one more question.
Do I support in math journals authors put their names in alphabetical order, so it's hard to know who is the first author? Do I support? To be honest with you, I have no strong feelings one way or the other. I think it is useful to know who the first author is. Very often the authors are referenced, their names are in order, but a key will show, well, a numeral key will show where the authors come from, and number one is usually the first named author, but I must admit, I don't really have any strong feelings one way or the other. And I have to declare, in all honesty, in my career, I haven't actually published any maths journals. Most of my journals have been published in the hard sciences, and physics, chemistry, material science, the environment, energy, and I've also worked in linguistics in the social sciences, but never in maths. So as you can probably tell, I'm slightly uncertain of my ground there as well. Full disclosure. And for the next question, I would suggest providing up-to-date data, just because it is the latest possible information around. I don't know how long it would take you to do that. I don't think there's any problem with publishing data that was from analysis that was conducted in 2016. But without knowing exactly what you're doing, will the data change that much? I guess if the data hasn't changed that much or at all, then there's no point in conducting new work. But if it has changed, if you do think it will have changed in the intervening 6 years, it probably would be wise to conduct new experiments. And it's also worth checking to see whether in those 6 years somebody else has conducted, has developed or published data, similar data. I guess you would do that anyway, but
The next question is, can you find the next question?
is that the? I've got. Well, thank you.
When it comes to the cover letter, does it have any information? If it has, could you give me the form?
Not really other formation. I'm still sharing, aren't I? Let's go back to that. Okay. Oh, sorry, lost it. Sorry, guys. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is, right, there we go. Bear with me, we'll get there. Oh, there we go. Okay. So that is a way of constructing the letter. I mean, the cover letter wouldn't go on for much. It's been cut off at the bottom here, but that is pretty much the size, the length of a cover letter and the construction of the cover letter. So this is being recorded, isn't it, Peng? So
yeah.
So we can you can look at this at your leisure, and I'm sure there probably are other examples online as well.
Yeah, and then we move on to the next one. Is suggesting some reviewers required in general? Would it be rude or inappropriate to submit a paper without any suggestion of reviewers?
No, it's not rude. It's not, no, not at all. But it just helps. It may help the editor. It may not actually help the editor regarding your paper, but the editors are colleagues of yours in your community as well, and so it's just a nice. It could be of help to the editors for somebody else's paper, so it's not impolite, it's not rude not to provide them, but by providing them, but you're researching your community as well, so you're getting to know it better, and maybe the people within it better as well. So it's looking for those little gains, I remember hearing athletes talk about getting that extra little percent that might make all the difference by wearing the right running shoes, or by wearing the right shirts, or whatever. Or if you're a swimmer, shaving every hair off your body just to get that extra bit of help. So, that's what that is about. Just trying to give yourself more of an advantage, more help, and building a relationship. The editor might, the paper might be rejected anyway, but the next time you resubmit, the editor will get your submission and say, "Oh, that's from that nice researcher at Seoul National University. I remember him, or I remember her. I'll spend a bit more time with." So yeah, it's about building relationships.
Okay, thanks. And the next one is a bit broader. How would I choose the proper journal for publication?
Right. Well, a couple of things I said in the presentation. Which papers which journals do you read when you're doing your research? When they are the ideal journals to consider. You can ask your head of department if you're unsure. You can ask your head of department whether you think it's the relevant journal. The aims and scope of the journal. It could be that you read a journal, you think that's the one you should submit to, and double check by going onto the journal homepage and reading the aims and scope of the journal, and to see whether it matches your submission. But I'll repeat it again, that piece of advice, read something that you're familiar with, it just makes sense. Don't go. There are lots of researchers out there who they chase the impact factor of a journal. If the impact factor is high, they think that's the one I want. And very often a paper will be rejected. And I'm not saying this is always the case. Your research might be cutting edge, it might be extremely novel, it might be earth-shattering, in which case you want to submit to the highest ranked journal. But sometimes the highest ranked journal isn't an appropriate place for your research. Within chemistry, as use it as an example, you have chemistry journals, but then again you have analytical chemistry journals, organic chemistry journals, inorganic chemistry journals, and the list goes on. And then below that, below analytical chemistry journals, you might have something like chromatography journals or chemometrics, so that there are specific areas. So I'd always say, don't necessarily chase the impact factor, because you might be wasting your time. If you're researching chemometrics, why not choose a journal that's dedicated to chemometrics? Because every person that reads that journal is interested in what you have to say. Not everybody who reads a broad chemistry journal will necessarily be interested in your research. So yeah.
I think we got the last questions. Actually, that's 2 questions. The very last one.
When it comes to citation. So when it comes to citation and reference, even if the original source was not written in English. I think it's probably, if for example, excuse me if I've misunderstood, but if the original paper is written and published, say, in a Korean journal, and then you resubmit to you write an English version of the paper and you submit to an English journal, you're telling that English journal's editors that you've already published in Korea, and you'll reference that. I think the people referencing the paper they'll reference the paper that they read. So in a way, you're not hiding the fact that it was originally published in Korean when you resubmit to the English journal. So that reference is also included in the English version. That's highlighted there. So somebody in the States might read it in English and reference that paper. But when he's referencing the paper, or she's referencing the paper to another reader, the reader will go into the paper and they'll see that the original paper was published in Korea anyway. So,
David, just in case there's another meaning of this, well, maybe my understanding was wrong too. But what if this person wants to cite an article that is written in Korean, but he's writing an English article, so he wants to cite a Korean article. So in his English article, so he has to translate the reference into English.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I mean, because if the main body of the article that's being written is being written in a language, whatever language it is, that the reference in that article should be written in the same language, because it would make no sense for somebody. If I was to write a reference in English and present it to somebody in Korea who didn't speak English, that's pointless on my part. That's my error. So yeah, you're right. You're preparing a manuscript for you're preparing a manuscript in a given language. So the references should be in English as well. Just translate those, even if it's to a Korean journal. And then of course that's down to the reader. If the reader then wants to invest some time into getting the Korean journal and reading it, or learning Korean, or asking a Korean colleague to help them read it, that's up to them. But yeah, in the English journal, you should reference in English and vice versa as well.
Yeah, and there was a second part of the question.
If I had 2 minutes. I don't think so. I think that editors, if the research data if it's important enough, I don't think a good editor won't be too bothered about the text. If the original research in Korean, say, has been published in a reputable Korean scientific journal, the editor will know that. The editor will know of the journal, but may not be able to read it, but will appreciate that it is a reputable journal. Now, then it comes down to how strong is the research that you're presenting? How strong is your paper? You know, if it's really unique, novel research, then the editor's excitement at that will outweigh the extra work that may have to be done looking at the text in the Korean journal. But yeah, so on balance, it would depend on how important the research is. But if it's really that important, I would say that you should, you know, if it's that important, I would go to the broadest possible, the journal that reaches furthest, and generally they are English-speaking journals, so I would go to that journal first, to be honest. And of course, if it's just research for, I don't know, I can't think of an example, but for something that is specific to South Korea and nobody else in the world are interested in it, then there's no point in sending it to an English journal anyway. I'm getting myself confused. Sorry, guys, it's early in the morning still for me. I haven't had my coffee yet, so.
It makes sense. It does make sense. So don't worry about it. Yeah. I think that's the last question we got. And is there anything else you want to add, David?
No. I mean, thank you very much I realize it's late in the afternoon for you all over there. So thank you for staying with it. And as I say, please feel free to reach out whenever you wish. Give me 10 minutes to have a coffee, and then I'll be alert. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Yeah, and we will share the video recording and then the slides after the webinar. Thank you. Have a good evening.